Daniel settled into his new home in the high-end gated community of Maplewood Heights, a picturesque neighborhood adorned with manicured lawns and elegant houses. The move had marked a significant transition for him, one he had longed for since retiring from a distinguished career in architecture. As a retired veteran, he sought not just luxury but also solace after years of service. The serene environment promised him peace, allowing him to indulge in hobbies he had put aside. He envisioned days filled with tranquility, long walks along the tree-lined streets and evenings spent on his porch, savoring the sunset. However, the reality of his new life presented unique challenges. Being a wheelchair user added layers to his daily routine that many residents took for granted. Daniel was determined to adapt his new space to fit his needs without compromising its aesthetic appeal. To that end, he commissioned a sleek, modern ramp that seamlessly blended with the lines of his home's architecture. The ramp was not merely functional. It was a statement about accessibility and design. Daniel believed that beauty and functionality could coexist, reflecting his philosophy as an architect who had spent years breaking barriers in design. Yet, it wasn't long before Daniel's vision collided with the stringent rules enforced by the Homeowners Association, HOA. Within days of moving in, he received a notice that would shake the foundations of his newfound paradise. The HOA deemed his ramp a non-compliant structure, citing their clause regarding maintaining neighborhood charm. To them, the elegant design was an eyesore. They demanded he replace it with something more traditional, implying that conformity outweighed the individual expression represented by his personalized ramp. Initially taken aback by this aggressive stance, Daniel felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. He had always believed that communities should be inclusive, fostering an environment where everyone could thrive regardless of their physical limitations. This ideal was now under threat from a group that seemed more concerned with maintaining appearances than promoting accessibility. As he contemplated his next steps, memories flooded back from his days as an influential architect. He recalled leading groundbreaking projects focused on accessibility redesigns for federal buildings, including significant contributions to making structures like the White House more navigable for individuals with disabilities. What many didn't know was that Daniel was not only passionate about architecture, but also dedicated to advocating for HOA compliance policies nationwide. With this hidden identity weighing on him like armor against adversity, Daniel decided that he could not remain quiet while being pushed into conformity. He began researching local ordinances and HOA regulations meticulously. Each day brought renewed determination as he prepared himself to contest the HOA's unreasonable demands. The conflict escalated quickly. Every morning brought a fresh violation notice accompanied by escalating fines designed to pressure him into submission. Faced with mounting financial penalties and feeling cornered by an unjust system, Daniel reached out to local advocacy groups specializing in disability rights. They rallied behind him as he filed an official HOA complaint against the HOA. His dilemma soon attracted media attention at the local level. A story about an architect battling over accessibility resonated within the community's consciousness, as they began to question their own values regarding inclusivity and design integrity. However, it wasn't until national media outlets caught wind of Daniel's plight, with interviews featuring colleagues and friends from Washington, D.C., that things really started to change. The narrative shifted from one man's struggle against bureaucracy to an examination of how communities across America approach accessibility and inclusion, or lack thereof. As people tuned in through news broadcasts and social media platforms, support surged for Daniel's cause. Countless others shared their experiences navigating similar challenges within their own neighborhoods. As tensions mounted between Daniel and the HOA, it became clear this wasn't just about a ramp anymore. It represented something much larger: the right to live freely and comfortably without discrimination or exclusion based on physical abilities. One evening, as he watched dusk settle over Maplewood Heights from his porch, ramp glistening softly in the last light, he felt both hopeful and determined for what lay ahead. With public sentiment growing increasingly supportive toward him, little did he know that change was just around the corner, a reckoning that would not only impact him personally, but could potentially transform how entire communities approached accessibility moving forward. After settling into his new home, Daniel poured his passion for design into the installation of a ramp that would not only serve a practical purpose, but also enhance the overall aesthetic of his residence. He envisioned a sleek, modern ramp that would harmonize with the contemporary lines of his house, a reflection of both functionality and elegance. Each curve and angle was meticulously planned, embodying his belief that accessibility should never come at the expense of beauty. The ramp was crafted from high-quality materials that showcased a subtle sheen, glinting in the sunlight while blending seamlessly with the natural palette of his home. Its design featured smooth, flowing lines that mirrored the architectural elements of the house, large windows framed by soft, neutral tones and a bold entrance that invited guests inside. To Daniel, this ramp was more than just a means to navigate, it was an integral part of his home's identity. As the ramp took shape, Daniel felt a sense of pride in creating something that stood as a testament to his skills as an architect. Structure gently sloped from the ground to the entrance, allowing for easy access without compromising on safety or comfort. Each detail was carefully considered. He utilized non-slip surfaces to ensure stability and installed elegant handrails that complemented the overall design rather than detracting from it. This ramp was intended not only for himself, but also as a symbol for others in the community, an invitation to embrace accessibility as an essential feature rather than an afterthought. Daniel hoped it would inspire neighbors to rethink their views on design and inclusivity, encouraging conversations about how homes could be made accommodating without sacrificing style. However, the excitement surrounding the ramp's installation soon morphed into anxiety as he awaited feedback from the HOA. He had been aware of their reputation for strict adherence to traditional aesthetics, but held on to hope that they would recognize his intentions. Surely they would appreciate the thoughtfulness behind his design rather than dismiss it outright. When the first notice arrived, stating that the ramp did not comply with neighborhood standards, Daniel initially struggled to comprehend their objections. He had poured so much heart and expertise into this project with a vision of community acceptance. The notion that something he designed with such care could be deemed an eyesore felt like a direct affront to his values as both a veteran and an architect. The HOA's demand for a more traditional ramp echoed in his mind like an unwanted refrain. In their eyes, his sleek creation clashed with the older, more conventional structures that defined Maplewood Heights. This perspective not only undermined his efforts, but also reinforced an outdated mentality toward disability and accessibility. Determined to defend his work, Daniel reached out to fellow architects and friends who had been part of his journey in advocating for inclusive design. They provided him with insights about how architecture can challenge norms and create spaces that welcome all individuals. Inspired by their encouragement, he delved deeper into local ordinances regarding accessibility standards and HOA compliance. Each evening, while reflecting on his accomplishments and struggles from his porch, Daniel's resolve grew stronger. He imagined how changing perceptions about accessibility could ripple through the community, how other residents might see ramps not just as functional necessities, but as beautiful extensions of their homes. As he envisioned this transformation, he became increasingly aware of the responsibility resting on his shoulders. With each violation notice from the HOA stacking up like dark clouds on the horizon, he knew he had to stand firm against conformity. His ramp was not merely a physical structure. It represented dignity, freedom, and a commitment to breaking down barriers faced by many individuals with disabilities. Determined to fight back against the HOA, Daniel began drafting plans for a community discussion about inclusivity in design. He envisioned bringing together residents to discuss how architecture could evolve within their neighborhood, where beauty met accessibility, inviting them to share their own experiences and ideas. This gathering would serve as a platform for cooperation rather than division, redefining what it meant to live in a community that embraced all its members. With every passing day, what began as a personal struggle transformed into a movement that could resonate throughout Maplewood Heights and beyond. Daniel realized he was not just defending a ramp. He was championing a vision for a future where accessibility was celebrated as an integral part of design, a vision he was now more passionate about than ever before. The morning sun filtered through the trees as Daniel sipped his coffee on the porch, feeling a sense of accomplishment from his recent ramp installation. It wasn't long, however, before that tranquility was shattered by an unexpected letter. The envelope bore the official seal of the Maplewood Heights Homeowners Association, and a sense of foreboding crept into his chest as he opened it. Inside was a violation notice citing his elegant ramp as a non-compliant structure. The HOA demanded its immediate removal or replacement with something deemed more traditional to comply with their standards for maintaining neighborhood charm. As he read the lines of what felt like an unwarranted attack on his work, Daniel's heart sank. This ramp, built with intention and care, symbolized not only his personal journey, but also the broader fight for accessibility. The HOA's description of tradition struck him as absurd. What constituted tradition in a neighborhood that prided itself on modern design? To Daniel, their call for conformity represented more than just architectural preferences. It hinted at a troubling mindset that placed adherence to outdated norms above individual expression or inclusivity. He crafted a thoughtful response to the HOA, carefully articulating his vision for accessible design and arguing that his ramp blended seamlessly with the aesthetics of his home. He highlighted its functionality while emphasizing that beauty should not be sacrificed for compliance. Inspired by countless architectural principles he had studied and implemented throughout his career, Daniel felt it was vital to advocate for change rather than quietly comply. But when he handed over his reply to the HOA office, he could see from their cold expressions that they were unmoved. Instead of engaging in dialogue, they issued further penalties. Daily fines began stacking up like unwelcome reminders of his supposed transgression. Frustration bubbled inside him. He felt helpless against a system that appeared devoid of compassion or understanding. Driven by determination rather than despair, Daniel began researching local laws regarding accessibility requirements and HOA regulations. Each evening, lost in legal texts and guidelines, he recognized how crucial this fight had become, not just for himself but for everyone who faced similar barriers in life. The ongoing struggle made it clear. He had to press forward not only for his own rights but to promote wider awareness surrounding accessibility issues within architectural discussions. As days turned into weeks marked by mounting fines, Daniel reached out to local advocacy groups specializing in disability rights. Their support rejuvenated him. They helped him formulate an official HOA complaint against the HOA. Through this process, he gained even more clarity about how inadequately many communities accommodate individuals with disabilities. News quickly spread throughout Maplewood Heights about Daniel's battle against the HOA. Local news outlets picked up on his story. A retired veteran architect fighting for not only personal freedom, but also community values that should embrace inclusivity rather than discourage it. His story resonated deeply within the community as people began discussing their own perceptions of what accessibility meant. Soon enough, national media caught wind of the situation when former colleagues from Washington, D.C. came forward to publicly support him. They spoke about Daniel's previous work, leading groundbreaking accessibility projects at federal buildings, a recognition that underscored not only his expertise, but also amplified the urgency surrounding this conflict. In an unexpected twist of fate fueled by mounting public sentiment and rising scrutiny toward the HOA's policies, an official review team from the HOA planned to visit Maplewood Heights to investigate complaints regarding noncompliance within homeowners' structures, specifically focusing on Daniel's case, among others. Daniel felt both anxious and empowered as he awaited their arrival. This could be a turning point not only for him, but for everyone affected by inadequate considerations around accessibility. He envisioned their verdict laying bare how far neighborhoods needed to evolve in their approaches toward inclusivity, an acknowledgement that being backward-looking in architecture could harm individuals who simply wanted equitable access. As pressure mounted on the HOA from all sides, including potential federal implications, they found themselves cornered into reevaluating their stance on design standards overall. The once supposedly unshakable authority now faced resistance unlike any they had experienced before. Sitting quietly on his porch during those tumultuous days leading up to the review team's findings, Daniel absorbed everything unfolding around him. The rising tides of change stirred hope deep within him as he prepared himself mentally and emotionally not just for this fight, but for whatever lay ahead in redefining spaces built for all individuals regardless of ability or circumstance. As the conflict with the Homeowners Association escalated, Daniel's mind was often preoccupied with memories of his impactful career as an architect. Few in the Maplewood Heights community knew the full extent of his background, and perhaps this was a blessing in disguise. A retired veteran, Daniel had once been a prominent figure in the architectural sphere, particularly renowned for his expertise in accessibility design. Reflecting on his journey, he remembered the thrill of leading critical projects aimed at transforming federal buildings into spaces where every individual, regardless of ability, could navigate freely and effortlessly. His most notable work included redesigning the accessibility features of iconic structures, including the White House, where he tackled the significant challenge of merging function with historical integrity. Each project had been an opportunity to break down barriers and foster understanding about the importance of universal design. Throughout his career, Daniel had also served as a consultant on national HOA compliance policy, working hand in hand with lawmakers and advocacy groups to ensure that the voice of individuals with disabilities was not just heard, but actively incorporated into legislative frameworks. He had spent countless hours conducting workshops, educating architects and developers on how to integrate accessibility principles into their designs effectively. This experience had instilled in him a deep-seated belief that good architecture should serve everyone. Despite these accomplishments, now living in what he hoped would be a peaceful community, Daniel felt invisible in a way he never expected. The residents around him perceived him merely as another retiree enjoying a quiet life, unaware of his rich history and profound knowledge regarding design and inclusivity. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a champion for accessibility, fighting against a system that resisted the very progress he had dedicated his life to achieving. In many ways, this battle against the HOA had rekindled Daniel's passion for advocacy. As fines piled up and tensions rose, he found himself drawing strength from his past experiences. He consulted with former colleagues who shared his commitment to accessibility, reminding him that this struggle was not just personal, but also rooted in a larger narrative. With each conversation, he recognized that his fight could ripple beyond his own predicament. It could ignite discussions about accessibility across the entire community. He began documenting his efforts carefully, notes on every violation letter received, records of fines imposed, and responses crafted to articulate both his design philosophy and legal standing under HOA regulations. This meticulous preparation would serve multiple purposes. Not only would it bolster his case against the HOA, but it would also allow him to pen articles and advocacy pieces aimed at educating others about the need for inclusive design. As news of his situation spread through local media outlets and social networks, Daniel's hidden identity began to emerge. Former colleagues whom he hadn't spoken to in years reached out to express their support, sharing stories of his past achievements and contributions to the field. It became clear that Daniel had allies willing to stand up for him, not just in defense of one man's home, but for the rights of all individuals who crave accessibility. With each interaction and supportive message from friends or even strangers who shared their own struggles with accessibility issues, Daniel felt invigorated. He realized that while this particular fight was sparked by a ramp, it symbolized something much larger, a call for communities to embrace diversity and recognize the value of adaptive designs tailored to meet varied needs. Drawing from his extensive knowledge base, he began preparing educational materials that could be shared during community meetings, illustrating how inclusive design fosters not only beauty, but also functionality across all neighborhoods. He aimed to challenge residents' perceptions around what constituted charm by showcasing examples of successful designs that merged aesthetics with accessibility in innovative ways. The more he advocated for change, the more momentum he felt building behind him. Discussions began bubbling up within the community about hosting forums focused on accessibility and design, an initiative that could position Maplewood Heights as a pioneer in inclusive living. As he sat in his home office reviewing plans for upcoming meetings, Daniel drew inspiration from past projects while contemplating how far he still had to go in this journey. Despite facing resistance from the HOA, he understood that every moment spent advocating for equality could create ripples reaching beyond mere compliance. They could redefine how architecture is viewed in relation to diverse human experiences. This fight was not just about keeping his ramp. It was about opening doors, both literal and metaphorical, for others like him who deserved to move freely through spaces designed for everyone. In Daniel's heart burned a renewed commitment to championing accessibility, a mission worth every ounce of effort as he readied himself for whatever lay ahead. As the days turned into weeks, the situation with the Homeowners Association grew increasingly dire for Daniel. Each morning, he would open his mailbox to find yet another letter from the HOA, each one containing a fine for his supposed noncompliance. The first few notices included polite warnings, but as his defiance persisted, the tone shifted dramatically. Fines escalated to alarming amounts, piling on top of each other like an avalanche of unjust penalties. The HOA's strategy was clear. They were attempting to wear him down financially, hoping to force him into submission. Each letter felt like a physical blow, and with each fine, his frustration deepened. Daniel had long believed in the power of design to inspire change and foster community, but now he was feeling suffocated by the rigid and outdated views of those in power around him. Daniel began to document everything meticulously. He collected his violation notices and fines, and started keeping a daily journal of interactions with the HOA. He recounted conversations with neighbors who approached him to express their support, as well as those who urged him to consider replacing his ramp with a more traditional structure. It became imperative for him to gather evidence that showcased not only the unfair treatment he was facing, but also the broader implications for other residents who might find themselves in similar predicaments. Amidst this turmoil, Daniel decided that he had reached a breaking point. The relentless pressure from the HOA compelled him to take action beyond mere documentation. He resolved to file an official ADA complaint. It was a decision fueled by both anger and a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that this was not simply a matter about a ramp. It represented a critical fight for accessibility rights, challenging a system that seemed designed to exclude rather than include. Filing the complaint was an act of courage. Daniel felt anxious as he outlined his grievances regarding the HOA's actions, emphasizing how their demands violated ADA regulations and denied him equal access to his home. He sent out the formal complaint, hitting send, with a mix of relief and anxiety about the repercussions that might follow. As news of his complaint spread, local media outlets took notice. Journalists became intrigued by the story of a retired architect fighting against an HOA for the sake of accessibility, a fight that resonated with many who believed in fostering inclusive communities. Soon enough, Daniel found himself giving interviews, explaining not just his situation, but also delving into the principles of accessible design that he had championed throughout his career. Local residents began rallying behind Daniel as they learned more about his background and the significance of his fight. Those who once viewed him as just another neighbor started to see him as an advocate, a man standing up not only for himself, but for others who struggled against similar barriers. Social media buzzed with conversations about accessibility rights, amplifying Daniel's voice further and drawing attention from advocacy groups focused on disability rights. With momentum building, Daniel received heartfelt messages from individuals across the country who shared their own stories. Some recounted battles against restrictive homeowners associations, others spoke of navigating public spaces that lacked necessary accommodations. Each message fortified his resolve, reminding him that he was not in this fight alone. As he prepared for potential hearings regarding his ADA complaint, Daniel envisioned what could be on the other side of this struggle, a community transformed by understanding and inclusion. He imagined workshops where residents could learn about adaptive design principles, discussions that would challenge outdated norms, and gatherings that embraced diversity. In this light of hope, he also started drafting plans for community forums intended to raise awareness about accessibility needs within Maplewood Heights. His aim was not merely to advocate for himself, but to enlighten others on how thoughtful design could enhance their lives, creating spaces where everyone could thrive regardless of ability. Yet beneath the newfound optimism lay an undercurrent of anxiety about how the HOA would respond to these developments. The stakes were high. Each new article and social media post elevated his profile, but also intensified the HOA's scrutiny. Days passed with little change in their approach, until Daniel received word that an official review team from the ADA would visit Maplewood Heights to assess compliance issues, specifically regarding complaints similar to his own. This news sent a ripple of anticipation through the community and brought both hope and fear. Would this be a turning point for not only Daniel's struggle, but also for countless others who had faced similar injustices? As he waited for the team's arrival, he focused on maintaining clarity and resolve, reminding himself that he was fighting for something much larger than just a ramp, a vision of accessibility that could redefine what it meant to live in an inclusive community. As the local news began to cover Daniel's struggle against the Homeowners Association, interest in his story grew rapidly. Reports highlighted not only his personal battle over the ramp, but also the broader implications of accessibility and inclusivity in neighborhood design. Local television stations featured interviews with Daniel and his neighbors, some of whom spoke passionately about the need for understanding and accommodation of individuals with disabilities. The narrative quickly transformed from a simple dispute into a compelling story about the fight for equal rights within a seemingly idyllic community. Viewers were captivated by Daniel's journey, his background as an acclaimed architect, and his commitment to advocating for inclusive design struck a chord with many. People began to share the news articles on social media, amplifying its reach and inspiring discussions around accessibility issues in their own communities. What started as a local conflict quickly escalated into a conversation that resonated with audiences beyond Maplewood Heights. As the story gained traction, Daniel found himself inundated with messages of support from across the country. Friends and former colleagues from Washington, D.C., where he had worked on various federal accessibility initiatives, reached out to express their solidarity. It was during this time that a few of them suggested issuing public statements advocating for him, emphasizing his significant contributions to the field of architecture and disability rights. The response from his colleagues was overwhelming. They shared anecdotes about their collaborative efforts to make federal buildings more accessible and highlighted Daniel's instrumental role in shaping policies that promoted inclusivity nationwide. These endorsements added weight to Daniel's fight, showcasing that he was not just an individual battling against an HOA, but rather part of a larger movement advocating for systemic change. With renewed vigor, Daniel organized interviews with some of these former colleagues, culminating in a powerful piece that aired nationally. The coverage brought expert opinions on HOA compliance and discussed the necessity of modernizing neighborhood standards to reflect contemporary values around inclusivity. Audiences saw firsthand how rigid adherence to traditional designs could perpetuate exclusion, contributing to broader societal issues related to accessibility. This national exposure shifted the momentum in favor of Daniel's cause. As more people became aware of his struggle, pressure mounted on the HOA to respond. The association, which had previously dismissed his concerns as trivial or unfounded, now faced growing scrutiny from both residents and those outside the community who championed accessibility rights. Social media campaigns calling for reform flooded various platforms, urging the HOA to reconsider its stance on compliance issues. Meanwhile, as Daniel prepared for potential hearings regarding his HOA complaint, he felt buoyed by the support surrounding him. He began drafting plans for community workshops aimed at educating residents about the principles of universal design and accessible living spaces. His vision included inviting experts to speak on how homes could be redesigned without sacrificing aesthetics while addressing the needs of all community members. With each passing day, excitement built as anticipation grew for the official HOA review team's visits scheduled within weeks. This impending assessment was pivotal. It represented both an opportunity for Daniel to voice his concerns in an authoritative setting and a chance for the neighborhood to engage in critical dialogue about necessary changes. People in Maplewood Heights began to rally around the idea that creating inclusive spaces should be a priority for all neighborhoods. Discussions surfaced about how they could incorporate adaptive features into their homes, whether it be ramps or other assistive technologies, emphasizing that these changes could enhance everyone's living experience rather than detract from it. However, alongside this optimism lay an undeniable undercurrent of tension. The HOA appeared increasingly defensive as media coverage expanded. Their attempts to maintain control over community standards were threatened by growing demands for transparency and accountability. Residents who had once been neutral started to question whether adherence to outdated norms was worth sacrificing inclusion. As the date of the HOA review approached, Daniel reflected on how far he had come since those initial fines arrived in his mailbox. What once felt like an insurmountable challenge had transformed into a rallying cry for change, one that could reverberate beyond himself and impact countless others striving for equality and access in their communities. With determination etched on his face, he prepared not only for the potential confrontation ahead, but also for what might emerge afterward. A chance to reshape perceptions around accessibility within Maplewood Heights, fostering a community that embraced diversity and honored every resident's right to flourish in their own home. This fight was no longer just about one ramp. It had evolved into a movement poised to redefine standards of living and belonging for all individuals, regardless of ability. The day the official HOA review team arrived at Maplewood Heights was charged with anticipation and a nervous energy that coursed through the community. Daniel, who had prepared extensively for this moment, felt both anxious and empowered as he stood outside his home, watching the team's vehicles roll through the gates. This was not just a pivotal moment for him, but one that could alter the course of accessibility in his neighborhood. The team, composed of experts in HOA compliance and civil rights, was tasked with investigating complaints about the HOA's enforcement of their regulations, specifically focusing on how they interacted with Daniel's situation. As they set up their equipment and began conducting interviews with residents, Daniel's heart raced. He had imagined this very moment, experts validating his fight, and now it was finally happening. The review team started by meeting with residents who had expressed support for Daniel during the media coverage. They listened attentively as neighbors shared their experiences and frustrations regarding the HOA's rigid adherence to outdated design standards. Many emphasized how these restrictions marginalized those with disabilities within a community that touted itself as welcoming. Armed with first-hand accounts, the review team moved forward to assess Daniel's ramp directly. They examined its design, functionality, and integration into his home, a stark contrast to what it would look like if replaced by a more traditional structure. Their observations were careful and thorough. They documented every detail while making clear to residents present that their findings would have significant implications. Daniel watched from a distance as conversations unfolded between the review team members and other residents in attendance. He could see that there was no dismissing what appeared to be an atmosphere of confusion about what constituted compliance versus genuine inclusivity. The more dialogues ensued about accessibility, the more clarity emerged among those present. The need for change was palpable. Hours passed as the investigation progressed. After interviewing several residents, including Daniel himself, the HOA team convened privately to discuss their findings. The discussions were serious. Word began to spread that initial assessments indicated violations of federal regulations by the HOA regarding accessibility standards. When the review concluded, one of the lead investigators approached Daniel, gratitude evident in her expression. "We appreciate your willingness to share your story," she said earnestly. "Based on what we've seen and heard today, we are prepared to issue our findings that demonstrate significant shortcomings in how Maplewood Heights enforces its policies." With bated breath, Daniel listened intently as she continued explaining how they plan to document their findings in an official report detailing violations concerning HOA regulations. Tension hung thick in the air. Residents exchanged glances filled with hope mixed with anxiety about what this could mean for their community's future. As night fell over Maplewood Heights, word spread like wildfire about potential ramifications for the HOA if these violations went unaddressed. It quickly became apparent that there was much at stake, not just for Daniel, but for all homeowners who relied on equitable treatment within their own neighborhood. In subsequent days leading up to the report's release, tension mounted among HOA board members as discussions turned toward addressing concerns raised during the investigation. They faced mounting pressure from both within and outside their ranks. Resistance built against old policies that no longer served an inclusive vision. Meanwhile, social media erupted in excitement at news of impending changes. Community members amplified calls for transparency from their HOA on social platforms, while sharing stories supportive of inclusive living environments across America. Finally came the day when the HOA team's findings were publicly announced. As families gathered in a community forum organized hastily by supporters of accessibility rights, Daniel took center stage alongside leaders from advocacy organizations who had rallied behind him throughout this fight. The document unveiled shocking revelations. Not only had local policies fallen short of federal standards concerning accessibility requirements, but failure to make necessary adjustments could result in severe financial consequences. Potential loss of federal housing support hung like a sword over Maplewood Heights. A sense of urgency ignited throughout those present. Applause erupted, accompanied by cheers expressing solidarity among neighbors celebrating newfound knowledge gained through this process. The realization that change wasn't just possible but impending. With renewed hope pulsing through every corner of his community, Daniel felt a profound shift happening around him. A wave driven by collective understanding rather than isolation, transforming previously rigid perspectives into advocates passionate about inclusivity, moving forward together. As conversations blossomed into planning sessions focused on creating workshops dedicated to universal design principles, integrating innovative ideas, reflecting accessible living spaces, without sacrificing aesthetics, began taking shape immediately following this pivotal revelation. The community's commitment solidified around honoring diversity across all abilities. For Daniel, this monumental climax reinforced many lessons learned during his journey thus far. It wasn't simply about fighting one singular battle against an unjust force. It was about fostering an environment where everyone could thrive equally together regardless of circumstance. A vision coming closer into focus right before his eyes, even beyond keeping his ramp intact amidst contentious debates surrounding compliance issues alone. This moment solidified not merely victory held tightly yet unleashed promises demanding progressive steps toward collective uplifting aimed directly at opening doors previously perceived shut tight long before anyone dared even knock within Maplewood Heights. In the days following the ADA review team's findings, the atmosphere in Maplewood Heights was electric with anticipation and newfound resolve. Residents gathered in living rooms and community centers alike to discuss what lay ahead, united by a shared vision for a more inclusive neighborhood. Daniel, now more than just a neighbor, had become a beacon of hope and a catalyst for change. The Homeowners Association, facing mounting pressure, convened an emergency meeting to address the serious violations identified by the ADA review team. Daniel attended, his heart pounding as he walked into the room filled with skeptical board members. The mood among the HOA had shifted from defiance to concern, as they were acutely aware of the potential consequences of their inaction. The threat of losing federal housing support loomed large over them like a rain cloud ready to burst. At that meeting, Daniel presented a compelling case, laying out not just his personal experiences, but also emphasizing how transforming their policies could benefit the entire community. "This isn't just about my ramp," he began confidently, his voice steady despite the palpable tension in the room. "It's about creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and valued. We have a unique opportunity to become leaders in accessibility, a model for other communities." After hours of discussion, during which residents voiced their support and shared personal accounts of feeling marginalized by the HOA's restrictive policies, it became clear that change was necessary. The board members acknowledged that they needed to revise their bylaws and adapt to comply with ADA regulations if they wanted to retain credibility and support from not only their residents, but also the larger public. By the end of the evening, an agreement had been reached. A comprehensive rewrite of the existing bylaws would begin immediately. Daniel would lead this architectural overhaul, applying his decades of experience and expertise to construct a set of standards that embraced accessibility as a core value rather than an afterthought. As word spread throughout Maplewood Heights about the restructuring efforts, excitement bubbled over into community meetings held in parks and around neighborhood fire pits. Daniel was frequently invited to present his ideas. He explained how accessibility was not merely a legal obligation, but a profound ethical one that enriched everyone's lives. His presentations included practical examples of good design practices, how ramps, wider doorways, and clear sightlines could be appealing and functional. With each workshop he facilitated, Daniel watched as residents began to shift from skepticism about accessibility features to embracing them wholeheartedly. The community began brainstorming ideas for implementing these changes throughout their homes collectively. Ideas flowed freely about how they could enhance not just safety for those requiring mobility aids, but also create harmonious designs that reflected their aesthetic values. The HOA board formed a committee dedicated specifically to overseeing this transformation, consisting of both board members and residents eager to contribute to this new direction. Weekly meetings allowed diverse voices to be heard. Participants shared their thoughts on how to make Maplewood Heights truly welcoming for all. Excitement reached its peak when plans were underway for a community-wide celebration that coincided with the unveiling of the new bylaws. Community members actively collaborated on organizing educational events focused on universal design principles. The celebration would showcase how inclusive design could function beautifully alongside traditional tastes. As the date approached for this landmark event, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment wash over him. He recalled his initial vision for creating a home where everyone, regardless of ability, could navigate freely and comfortably. Now it felt as if that dream was expanding beyond his own front porch into something much larger, a transformed Maplewood Heights that honored diversity in all its forms. On the day of the celebration, families came together amidst colorful banners proclaiming, "Accessibility is our strength." The air buzzed with laughter, music, and camaraderie as they shared stories about their own journeys towards advocacy and inclusion. When it came time for Daniel to speak at the event, he stood before a crowd filled with hope-spurred faces, illuminated by warm sunlight filtering through trees overhead. Today marks not just our victory, it signifies what we can accomplish when we come together. He began with heartfelt emotion spilling into each word. His message resonated deeply. Let us recognize that accessibility is not merely accommodating our neighbors, it's about fostering connection, a commitment we make to one another as members of this community. Applause erupted throughout the crowd, an affirmation not only of what they had achieved, but also of what lay ahead. A future filled with possibilities where every person could thrive without barriers holding them back. In that moment, surrounded by his neighbors celebrating their commitment to inclusivity, Daniel understood that this journey transcended individual struggles or architectural solutions. It had become a movement unlocking doors previously perceived as closed, transforming Maplewood Heights into an emblem of hope and belonging for all who called it home.